Blood. Fresh and warm slicking Jack Miller's fingers as he pressed them against the grip of the Sig Sauer P-26. He hadn't held this weapon in nearly 7 years. Hadn't wanted to. But the three men sprawled across the corporate office floor, one groaning, clutching a shattered kneecap. Two unconscious, their tactical gear doing nothing to protect them from a man who had trained to end threats in darkness. Those three men had left him no choice. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting stuttering shadows across overturned desks and shattered glass. Rain hammered the windows like 1,000 desperate fists, the October storm turning the Chicago skyline into a blur of gray and black. Somewhere in the building, an alarm wailed. Somewhere closer, a 7-year-old girl was trying very hard not to scream. Emma Hayes crouched behind an overturned executive desk, her small body curled into a ball, her arms wrapped around a stuffed rabbit with matted fur and a faded blue bow. Captain Hoppy. The rabbit had survived its 7 years of love of being dragged through airports and grocery stores and countless bedtime rituals. Tonight he was surviving something far worse. Jack's ears tracked the sound of footsteps in the corridor. Professional spacing. 3 sets, maybe 4. They moved with the cadence of men who had done this before, hunters, not amateurs. His breathing slowed, heart rate dropping into the familiar stillness that preceded violence. Old training surfacing through years of dormancy. The kind of readiness that never truly died, no matter how hard you tried to bury it. His phone buzzed against his thigh. One glance at the screen made his blood turn to ice. Unknown number. A text message, "Your son is next, see." For the first time since the fighting started, something other than cold calculation flickered in Jack's eyes. Not fear, rage, the kind of focused, controlled fury that had won wars and ended men who thought they were untouchable. Alex. They were threatening Alex. The girl's voice cut through his thoughts, small but steady despite the terror in her eyes. "Mr. Jack, are the bad men going to hurt us?" He knelt beside her, bringing himself to eye level. His bloodied hand touched her cheek gently, a strange contrast, violence and tenderness occupying the same moment. "No, sweetheart, they're not." He stood, raising his weapon toward the door. "Because I made a promise to your daddy a long time ago, and I always keep my promises." Footsteps growing closer. The mercenaries weren't retreating. They were regrouping, calling for reinforcements, preparing to finish what they'd started. Jack positioned himself between Emma and the door. 11 rounds in the magazine. 3 hostiles down. Intelligence suggested 6 total. The math was simple. The execution would be anything but. "Stay low," he whispered. "Count to 60. If I'm not back, run to the window. Mrs. Chen will be waiting." "But 60 seconds, Emma. Promise me." She nodded, her grip on Captain Hoppy tightening until her knuckles went white. She started counting under her breath, her voice barely audible over the rain and the distant alarms. Jack turned toward the door. His breathing slowed further. Heart rate down to 50, 45. The stillness before the storm. "Gentlemen," he called out, his voice carrying through the doorway, calm and cold as a winter grave. "You've got 10 seconds to leave. Trust me, you don't want to be the next ones I have to explain to my son." Laughter from the corridor. "1 security guard against 3 of us. Those are bad odds, friend." Jack's lips twitched, almost a smile. "Yeah, for you." 48 hours earlier, none of this had seemed possible. The apartment in Pilsen was small, barely 600 square feet of worn carpet and water-stained ceiling tiles. But it was clean, military neat despite the poverty that seeped through every crack and corner. Jack Miller had learned long ago that a man could lose everything: his career, his wife, his savings, his hope. But he could never lose his discipline. Discipline was the last thing standing between survival and surrender. 4:30 in the morning. The alarm clock was unnecessary. Jack's internal timer had been set to this hour for 30 years, and no amount of civilian life could reset it. He rose from the narrow bed, careful not to disturb the empty space beside him, the space that had belonged to Sarah once before the cancer had taken her piece by piece over 18 months of hospital visits and experimental treatments and prayers that went unanswered. First order of business, check on Alex. The boy slept peacefully in the room's only bedroom, his 8-year-old chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. On the nightstand, an inhaler stood sentinel, a constant reminder of the condition that had hospitalized Alex twice in the past year and cost more than Jack earned in 3 months. Severe asthma. The doctors said it was manageable with proper medication. What they didn't mention was that proper medication cost $340 a month, and Jack's checking account currently held $47.23. He watched his son sleep for a long moment, memorizing the peace on that young face. Alex had his mother's eyes, deep brown, warm, full of a kindness that the world hadn't beaten out of him yet. Jack intended to keep it that way. The medicine cabinet in the bathroom confirmed what he already knew: one inhaler left. Maybe 2 weeks' worth if Alex was careful. After that, the math got ugly. Coffee came next. Black, no sugar, brewed in a 10-year-old machine that wheezed and sputtered like a dying engine. Jack drank it standing at the kitchen counter, staring at the stack of envelopes he'd been avoiding for days. Red stamps screamed from their faces. Final notice, past due, collection pending. The hospital bills alone, the ones from Sarah's final months, still totaled $43,000. He'd sold the house, the truck, everything of value. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. His eyes drifted to the wall above the counter where 2 photographs hung in cheap frames. The first showed 7 men in desert camouflage standing in front of a dusty Humvee somewhere in Afghanistan. Jack recognized 4 of them. The 5th, the one with his arms slung around Jack's shoulders, grinning like a man who'd just won the lottery, was Captain Michael Hayes, team leader, best friend, the kind of man who made you believe in things like honor and sacrifice and brotherhood. Michael had been dead for 7 years now. Kandahar, a classified mission that officially never happened. An ambush that killed 4 good men and left Jack with a compass, a promise, and a guilt that no amount of time could wash away. The second photograph showed Jack in dress blues shaking hands with an older officer whose chest was covered in ribbons and medals. Colonel James Patterson, Jack's former commanding officer. A man who knew the truth about Kandahar, about Michael, about everything that had happened in those final bloody hours. Jack hadn't spoken to Patterson in 3 years. Some wounds were easier to ignore than heal. He finished his coffee, rinsed the cup, and prepared for another day of being invisible. The morning routine was compressed to 15 minutes. Wake Alex, make breakfast, cereal for the boy, nothing for himself, pack a school lunch from the meager supplies in the refrigerator, and walk the 6 blocks to Lincoln Elementary. October in Chicago was cold, but not brutal, the kind of weather that reminded Jack of pre-deployment mornings at Camp Lejeune, when the whole world seemed poised on the edge of violence. Alex held his hand as they walked, his backpack bouncing with each step. The boy was quiet this morning, his brow furrowed in thought. "Dad," he finally asked, his voice carrying that particular weight of a question he'd been holding for too long. "Are you going to eat today?" Jack's chest tightened. Kids noticed more than adults gave them credit for. "Big breakfast," he lied, keeping his voice light. "Already full." Alex didn't believe him. The look in those brown eyes said as much, but he nodded anyway, accepting the lie, the way children accept uncomfortable truths, not because they're fooled, but because they love too much to push. At the school gate, Jack knelt to straighten his son's jacket. "Have a good day, soldier. I'll pick you up at 3. "Love you, Dad." "Love you more, buddy. Always." He watched Alex disappear through the doors, his trained eyes scanning the perimeter, automatically checking for threats that weren't there, cataloging exit routes that would never be needed. Old habits, the kind that kept men alive in war zones and made them paranoid in peacetime. The walk to Maggie's diner took 12 minutes. Jack counted every step the way he'd been trained to count paces on patrol. Situational awareness. Never let your guard down. Never assume safety. The diner was a relic from another era, all chrome counters and vinyl booths and a neon sign that had been flickering for as long as anyone could remember. Maggie Chen, no relation to the Victoria Chen who ran Morgan Technologies, just one of those coincidences in a city of 3 million, had owned the place for 30 years, serving breakfast to the working poor of Bridgeport with the same no-nonsense efficiency she'd brought from her parents' restaurant in Chinatown. She was 62, widowed, and possessed the kind of sharp eyes that missed nothing. Jack had known her since childhood. His mother used to bring him here after church back when the world was simpler and fathers didn't have to choose between medicine and meals. The breakfast special was $4.99. Eggs, bacon, toast, coffee. Jack had found a $5 bill on the sidewalk yesterday, crumpled dirty, caught against a storm drain. He'd almost walked past it. Pride was a luxury he couldn't afford, but sometimes it whispered louder than hunger. In the end, he'd picked it up. For Alex, for one real meal after 3 weeks of instant noodles and tap water. He took his usual seat in the corner, booth back to the wall, exits visible. Maggie brought the coffee without being asked, her eyes taking in his worn jacket, his hollow cheeks, the way his wedding ring now spun loosely on a finger that had lost too much weight. "On the house," she said, nodding toward the menu. "No, Maggie, I can pay today." He slid the crumpled bill across the counter, meeting her eyes with something that might have been dignity or might have been desperation. "Let me pay." She understood. Some men needed to feel like they were still providing even when the world had stripped everything else away. She took the money, brought the food, and left him alone with his thoughts. The plate arrived like a miracle. Golden eggs, crispy bacon toast, buttered just right, steam rising in lazy spirals. Jack stared at it for a long moment, his stomach cramping with a hunger he'd learned to ignore. He picked up his fork, closed his eyes, said a silent grace, something Sarah had taught him back when faith came easier. The door crashed open. Wind and rain swept through the entrance, carrying with them a woman who looked like she crawled out of a nightmare. Designer clothes once expensive, now torn and soaked through. Shoes caked with mud, hair plastered to her face, dark strands covering eyes that held the kind of fear Jack recognized from combat zones. The fear of someone who had been running for too long, who expected danger around every corner. In her arms, clutched against her chest like a lifeline, was a little girl. Maybe 7 years old, pale, terrified, and holding a stuffed rabbit that made Jack's heart stop. Captain Hoppy. He knew that rabbit. Had watched Michael buy it at a gift shop in Dubai the night before their final mission. Had heard his best friend talk for hours about how his little girl was going to love it, how he couldn't wait to see her face when she opened the package. The woman collapsed into the nearest booth, her breathing ragged, her body shaking with exhaustion or cold or both. The little girl whimpered but didn't cry. She'd been taught to be quiet, Jack realized. Taught that noise meant danger. Other customers glanced up from their meals. A businessman in a tailored suit raised his newspaper higher, creating a shield against the uncomfortable reality of suffering. A young couple by the window suddenly found their phones fascinating. Eyes slid away, avoiding contact, avoiding involvement. Maggie approached cautiously. "Ma'am, can I help you?" The woman's lips moved, forming words that came out broken. My purse. They took everything. Please." Her voice cracked, splintered like ice under pressure. "My daughter hasn't eaten since yesterday. Please, I'll pay you back. The little girl's stomach growled, loud enough to hear across the diner. Her eyes, Michael's eyes, Jack realized with a jolt, fixed on his plate with desperate hunger. He looked down at his breakfast, his beautiful, perfect, 3 weeks in the making breakfast. The eggs were cooling, the bacon losing its crispness, the moment slipping away. He looked at the girl, at the rabbit, at the woman whose fear was so palpable it filled the room like smoke. He thought of Alex, of Sarah, of Michael dying in his arms, blood soaking into the Afghan sand. Those last words whispered between ragged breaths. "Promise me, Jack, watch over them. Please." A man's worth isn't measured by his wallet. It's measured by what he's willing to give when he has nothing left. Jack picked up his plate, stood, walked across the diner, feeling the weight of every step, the hollow ache of hunger, battling against something stronger. He set the plate in front of the little girl. "Here," he said quietly. "She needs this more than I do." The woman looked up at him. Confusion first, then suspicion, then something he couldn't quite name. "Why would you?" "Because someone needs to, and I'm someone." The little girl, Emma, he would learn later, didn't wait for permission. She grabbed the fork and ate like she hadn't seen food in days. The eggs disappeared first, then the bacon, then the toast crumbs falling onto the table as she devoured everything with the desperate efficiency of the truly hungry. Tears streamed down the woman's face, mixing with the rainwater, still dripping from her hair. "Thank you," she whispered. I can't." "Don't need thanks." Jack slid into the booth across from them, not to eat. There was nothing left to eat, but to watch, to protect. "Need you to stay alive. Those marks on your wrist say someone grabbed you. Professional, judging by the bruising pattern. The way you keep watching the door means you're expecting company. And that little girl," his eyes lingered on Captain Hoppy, "that little girl needs to finish eating." The woman's expression shifted, wariness replacing gratitude. "Who are you?" Night security guard. Morgan Technologies. Jack kept his voice calm, neutral. And you're Victoria Chen, CEO of Morgan Technologies. Your picture was in the Tribune last month. She had kept her maiden name professionally, Chen, like the company her father had built, though the wedding ring on her finger still carried the name Hayes. Michael's name. Her face went pale. If you know who I am, then I know someone very powerful is after you. Someone with resources and connections and men who know how to make problems disappear. Jack's gaze never wavered. I don't know why. Don't need to know. But I've been watching you for a long time, Mrs. Chen. Longer than you realize. Before she could respond, before the questions burning in her eyes could find voice, the sound of engines cut through the morning air. Jack's head snapped toward the window. Two black SUVs were screeching to a stop outside the diner, their doors flying open before the vehicles had fully stopped. Four men emerged. Tactical gear, professional movement. The kind of coordinated efficiency that came from military training or its mercenary equivalent. Jack's entire demeanor transformed. The tired security guard vanished like smoke, replaced by something harder, colder, more dangerous. His eyes tracked the approaching threat with predatory focus, calculating distances and angles and options in the space between heartbeats. Kitchen, he said, his voice low and commanding. Back door. Go. Now. Victoria's eyes widened. But go, not a request, an order. The voice of a man who had given commands under fire, who expected obedience because hesitation meant death. She grabbed him, lifted the girl and the rabbit in one motion, and ran for the kitchen. Maggie was already holding the door open, her weathered face set in grim understanding. Jack remained seated, waiting. The lead mercenary pushed through the diner entrance, rain dripping from his tactical vest eyes, scanning the room with predatory efficiency. Viktor Morozov. Jack recognized the type immediately: Eastern European training, combat-hardened, dangerous. The kind of man who had seen too much death to fear it anymore. Their eyes met across the diner. You, security guard. Victor's accent was thick Russian, or something close to it. Seen a woman, little girl? Jack didn't blink. Lots of women come through here, kids too. Victor stepped closer, his body language shifting from inquiry to threat. His gaze traveled over Jack's worn clothes, his calloused hands, the way he sat perfectly still, while everyone else in the diner had frozen like rabbits, sensing a hawk. You military once upon a time. What branch? The kind that doesn't appreciate being interrogated before coffee. A long moment stretched between them. Professional recognizing professional. Jack could see the calculation happening behind Victor's eyes, the assessment of threat level, the weighing of risk versus reward. The mercenary's hand drifted toward his concealed weapon. Jack didn't move, which was somehow more threatening than if he'd drawn a gun. Maggie's voice cut through the tension, sharp as broken glass. Sir, order something or leave. You're scaring my customers. Victor's jaw tightened. He scanned the diner one more time, searching for traces of his quarry. The woman and child were gone, vanished through the back door into the maze of alleys behind the building. We'll meet again, Victor said, his eyes locked on Jack's face, memorizing, cataloging. Looking forward to it. The mercenaries withdrew their vehicles, peeling away from the curb with a screech of tires that echoed through the morning air. Only when the sound faded completely did Jack allow himself to exhale. Victoria emerged from the kitchen, Emma still in her arms. Her expression mixed terror with something else, wonder perhaps, or disbelief. You just lied to armed mercenaries. For a stranger. Why? Jack looked at Emma, at Captain Hoppy, at the ghost of Michael Hayes that seemed to hover in the space between them. I made a promise once, he said quietly, to someone who can't collect. Doesn't mean I stopped owing. His phone buzzed. A text from Alex's school. Alex using inhaler frequently. May need early pickup. The world shifted on its axis, priorities realigning with the force of a collision. Alex, his son, needed him. The boy who had already lost his mother, who depended on Jack for everything, whose tiny lungs could betray him without warning. I have to go. Jack stood, already moving toward the door. My son. Victoria grabbed his arm. Her touch was desperate, her eyes pleading. Wait, I need help. Real help. The man behind this, Richard Conrad, he has people everywhere. Police. Feds, everyone I thought I could trust. Her voice cracked. He threatened Emma. Said if I went to the authorities, he'd take her. Make an example. Jack hesitated. 7 years of staying invisible. 7 years of watching from the shadows, protecting without being seen. He had built this life carefully, brick by brick, a fortress of anonymity designed to keep Alex safe. But that rabbit, that damn rabbit, Michael's last gift to a daughter he would never hold. Tonight, Jack said, the words escaping before he could stop them. Morgan Technologies. 9 o'clock. Back entrance. Don't bring anyone. Don't tell anyone. He scribbled an address on a napkin, thrust it into her hand. And Mrs. Chen, if you're playing me, you'll wish Conrad found you first. He left without looking back, his mind already racing ahead to the school, to Alex, to the inhaler, and the medication, and the impossible mathematics of poverty. Victoria stared at the napkin. The address was for her own building, her own company, the security guards she'd never noticed working in the shadows of the empire she'd built. Emma tugged at her sleeve, Captain Hoppy dangling from her other hand. Mommy, that man has sad eyes, like Captain Hoppy after Daddy went to heaven. The walk to Lincoln Elementary took 8 minutes at Jack's pace, a controlled march that burned through the distance like it was personal. His mind ran calculations, inhaler usage, medication levels, hospital costs, the cascading catastrophe that a serious asthma attack could trigger. Every breath Alex struggled with was another bill he couldn't pay, another step closer to the edge of an abyss he'd been skirting for years. He found his son in the nurse's office, pale and breathing through the aftermath of an episode. The inhaler lay empty on the desk, its precious contents exhausted in the battle to keep air flowing into 8-year-old lungs. Hey, buddy. Jack knelt beside the chair, keeping his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his throat. Rough morning. Alex managed a weak smile. Little bit, but I'm okay now. The nurse, a tired woman named Patricia, who had seen too many struggling families, handed Jack a form. Emergency contact update. As if the paperwork mattered when his son couldn't breathe. They walked home together, Jack carrying Alex's backpack, matching his pace to the boy's slow steps. The October sun broke through the clouds, briefly casting pale light across the neighborhood's tired streets. Dad? Alex's voice was thoughtful, the way it got when he'd been turning something over in his mind. At school, Tommy said his dad has a really important job. He makes lots of money and they have a big house. Jack's jaw tightened. Tommy's dad sounds like a lucky man. But you have an important job too, right? You protect people, that's what you said. Fear is a choice. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision that something else matters more. Yeah, buddy. Jack pulled his son closer, his arm wrapping around narrow shoulders. I protect people. It's what I've always done. So that's better than money, right? Protecting people. Jack thought about the bills on his counter. The empty medicine cabinet. The woman in the diner, and the little girl with the rabbit, and the mercenaries hunting them through Chicago streets. He thought about Michael bleeding out in the Afghan dust, making him promise to watch over a family that didn't even know he existed. Yeah, he said finally. Yeah, it is. That night, after Alex had fallen asleep with his backup inhaler clutched in his hand, Jack sat alone in the darkened apartment. The compass lay in his palm, its metal casing worn smooth by years of handling. Inside the lid, an inscription, "Some promises outlive us. M." Michael had given him this compass the night before the Kandahar mission. A joke, he'd called it. Something to keep Jack from getting lost. They'd both laughed the way soldiers laughed before combat, too loud, too long, trying to drown out the fear they'd never admit. 3 days later, Michael was dead. Jack closed his eyes and the memories came flooding back like a tide he'd been holding at bay for 7 years. The compound at night, the flash of muzzle fire, the explosion that threw him off his feet and filled the world with smoke and screaming. Michael's voice on the radio, "Get them out, Jack. I'll cover. Just get them out. I'm not leaving you behind." "That's an order, Master Sergeant. Get the team out. I'll catch up." But he hadn't caught up. The extraction had taken forever, fighting through the ambush, dragging wounded men to the helicopter while bullets chewed through the darkness. By the time Jack made it back to Michael's position, there was nothing left but blood and shell casings, and the compass lying in the dust like a broken promise. Of the 7-man team, only 3 survived. Jack had carried their names ever since the four who didn't make it, the four who trusted him to bring them home. He opened his eyes. The compass glinted in the darkness, its surface catching the faint glow of streetlights through the window. "I've been watching them for 7 years, brother," he whispered, "keeping my promise." Victoria and Emma took a job at Morgan Technologies, night security, close enough to intervene if something went wrong, far enough to stay invisible. The photograph on the wall seemed to watch him, Michael's grin frozen forever in that Afghan afternoon, his arm around Jack's shoulders, both of them believing they'd live forever. But today something went wrong. Conrad's people found them, mercenaries. The shadows aren't enough anymore. Jack reached under the bed. His fingers found the locked case he hadn't opened since the day he had buried his uniform in the back of his closet. The combination was burned into his memory. Sarah's birthday, Alex's birthday, the date of Michael's death. 3 numbers that defined everything he'd lost. The lock clicked open. Inside, layered like artifacts in a tomb, lay the remnants of another life. Military identification, service medals, commendations signed by generals whose names filled history books. A folded flag, the one they'd presented at Sarah's funeral, while a bugler played taps and Alex cried into Jack's shoulder. And beneath them, all wrapped in oiled cloth, the Sig Sauer P-20 lights. He lifted the weapon, and his hands knew what to do without being told. Check the chamber, inspect the barrel, load the magazine. Each motion was automatic, bypassing conscious thought entirely. 15 rounds, full capacity. Ready. The security guard was gone. Master Sergeant Jack Miller was coming out of retirement. At 9 o'clock, the back entrance of Morgan Technologies loomed like a portal to another world. Jack stood in the shadows, his security uniform pressed, imperfect. The SIG concealed beneath his jacket. Rain had started falling again, drumming against the pavement in a steady rhythm that masked the sound of footsteps. Victoria appeared at the designated time alone as instructed. She'd changed clothes practical, now dark colors, running shoes instead of heels. Her eyes scanned the darkness until they found him. "You came. I said I would." She moved closer, studying his face in the dim light. "I spent the afternoon trying to find out who you really are. Jack Miller. Night security, hired 8 months ago." Her voice hardened. "But before that, nothing. No employment records, no tax returns, no credit history. It's like you didn't exist until you walked through my company's doors. Some ghosts have good reasons for staying dead. If I'm trusting you with my daughter's life, I need to know who you are." Jack met her eyes. The moment stretched between them, heavy with secrets and the weight of years. "Marine Corps," he said finally. "Special Operations, 18 years. 3 combat tours, Fallujah, Afghanistan, places that don't officially exist." He paused. "I retired after a mission went wrong. Lost good men, lost my best friend." "What mission? Classified, even now. And you just happened to be working at my company." The answer rose to his lips, the truth he'd been hiding for 7 years, but before he could speak, alarms shattered the night. Security breach, red lights strobing through the windows, the distant sound of boots on concrete. Conrad's men had found them. Jack's hand moved to his weapon, drawing the SIG in one fluid motion. The transformation was complete now. No more pretense, no more hiding. The warrior stood revealed. "Secure room on sublevel 2, he said, already calculating distances and threat vectors. "Go, now." "What about you?" Jack's smile held no warmth. "I'm going hunting." He disappeared into the darkness before she could argue, moving through the building with the fluid confidence of a man who had spent months memorizing every corridor, every stairwell, every potential ambush point. Bradley's sophisticated technology had failed in seconds. Jack's methodology would not. The first sentry never saw him coming. Jack approached from a blind angle, using the building's architecture to mask his movement timing. His footsteps to coincide with the distant rumble of thunder outside. A sleeper hold applied with surgical precision rendered the man unconscious in 7 seconds without a sound. 2 more guards patrolled the 3rd-floor corridor, their night vision goggles giving them false confidence. Jack used that confidence against them, creating a distraction. A thrown piece of debris clattering against a far wall, then striking from the opposite direction, while their attention was divided. The first went down to a blow that targeted the nerve cluster behind the ear. The second had time to turn to see the shadow coming for him before Jack's fist ended his night. He collected their radios, listened to the chatter. Victor's voice crackled through the static. All units check in. Silence answered him. We have a ghost. Repeat, we have a ghost. Converge on executive floor. Find the woman. Jack keyed the radio, keeping his voice low. Your men are sleeping, Victor, all of them. You want to join them? Keep sending more. A pause, then Victor's response surprisingly calm. You are military. Special forces, I think. Tier 1 operator, perhaps. Perhaps. I also was military once. Spetsnaz, Alpha Group. Victor's accent thickened with something that might have been respect. We are not so different, you and I. Warriors following orders. Taking money to fight other men's wars. There's one difference. Jack moved as he spoke, never staying in one position long enough to be triangulated. I don't threaten children. Another pause. When Victor spoke again, his voice had hardened. The child is leverage. Business. Nothing personal. Everything about this is personal. Jack clicked off the radio, leaving his opponent with silence and uncertainty. The executive floor was quiet when Jack reached it, too quiet. The mechanical locks on the secure room were engaged, Victoria and Bradley presumably safe inside. But something felt wrong. The air carried a tension that set Jack's instincts screaming. He found the source 3 minutes later, a device attached to the building's ventilation system. Not a bomb, something subtler. A transmitter broadcasting on a frequency that it would carry through walls, through locked doors, through any barrier that Conrad's people might face. They weren't trying to breach the secure room. They were tracking it, waiting for Victoria to emerge. Patient. Professional. Jack disabled the transmitter and retreated, his mind racing through options. Conrad had resources, connections, time. This siege could last hours, and eventually his enemies would call in enough reinforcements to overwhelm any defense. He needed to change the equation. Needed to take the fight to Conrad instead of waiting for the next attack. But first he needed answers. And there was only one place to get them. The secure room on sub-level 2 smelled of recycled air and old secrets. Victoria Chen stood with her back against the reinforced door, her chest heaving, her eyes fixed on the man who had just dismantled 4 trained killers with the casual efficiency of someone completing a routine task. Emergency lights painted everything in shades of red and shadow, turning the space into something that felt more like a bunker than a corporate safe room. Jack swept the perimeter with practiced precision, checking corners and sight lines, ensuring no threat had preceded them into this concrete sanctuary. His movements were fluid, economical, carrying none of the exhaustion that should have followed 18 seconds of close-quarters combat. The SIG remained in his hand, an extension of his will. They'll regroup. His voice was calm, analytical. Victor, the leader, he's not stupid. He'll pull his remaining men back, reassess, call for reinforcements. We have maybe 30 minutes before the next wave. Victoria's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the cold wall, forcing herself to breathe. How do you know his name? I recognize the type. Eastern European training, probably Spetsnaz or something equivalent, the combat veteran. The way he moved in the diner, the way his men coordinated, that's not private security. That's military operating under corporate cover. You read all that from a 2-minute encounter. Jack finally holstered his weapon, turning to face her fully. In the red emergency lighting, his features seemed carved from granite-hard angles and deeper shadows, eyes that had seen too much and forgotten nothing. I spent 18 years reading people like him. It's how I stayed alive. The admission hung between them, heavy with implications. Victoria pushed off from the wall, her fears slowly transforming into the steel that had built a billion-dollar company from her father's modest defense contracts. You said you'd tell me who you are. No more deflections. No more cryptic answers. If you want me to trust you with Emma's life, I need the truth. Marine Corps, MARSOC Marine Raiders, Special Operations Command. Jack's voice was flat, reciting facts like items on a manifest. Master Sergeant, 18 years of service before I retired. 3 combat tours, Fallujah in 2004, the Afghan border in 2007, and Kandahar in 2011. Kandahar. Victoria's breath caught. The words seemed to echo in the confined space, bouncing off concrete walls. My husband was in Kandahar, Captain Michael Hayes. He died there in 2011. The silence that followed was absolute. Jack's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes, a crack in the armor, a glimpse of the weight he'd been carrying. I know. 3 syllables. 2 words. Victoria felt the ground shift beneath her feet. What do you mean you know? Captain Michael Hayes was my team leader. My best friend. Jack's jaw tightened, the muscle working beneath weathered skin. He was the reason I took this job. The reason I've been here for 8 months watching from the shadows, making sure nothing happened to you or Emma. Victoria's legs gave way. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the cold floor, her designer clothes staining with dust, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. You knew Michael. You were there when I was holding him when he died. The words landed like physical blows. Jack didn't elaborate, didn't soften the impact. He simply stood there, bearing witness to the pain his revelation had caused. Why, Victoria's voice cracked, why would you for 7 years, why didn't you ever say anything? Because Michael made me promise. His last words while the blood was pouring out of him and the extraction helicopter was screaming overhead. Jack's hand moved unconsciously to his chest, to the place where he kept the compass hidden beneath his shirt. He made me swear to watch over you, both of you, to keep you safe. And you just what? Took a security job, became invisible. That was the point. You didn't need some broken Marine in your life, carrying his guilt like a disease. You just needed to be safe. You needed someone watching, someone capable, someone who would never let anything happen to Michael's family. Victoria stared at him, tears streaming down her face. 7 years. 7 years of birthdays and holidays and parent-teacher conferences and late nights at the office, in every single moment of building a life from the ashes of grief. And through all of it, this stranger, this ghost had been watching, protecting, keeping a promise made to a dying man in the dust of Afghanistan. The job at Morgan Technologies, she whispered, the security position that opened up 8 months ago. The previous guard retired unexpectedly. Full pension, immediate departure. I may have facilitated that retirement. Nothing illegal, just encouraged him to take the package he'd been considering. You manipulated your way into my company to what stand guard outside my office? To be close enough to intervene if something went wrong. Jack's voice softened, the first crack in his military bearing. Like tonight. Victoria wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving streaks of mascara across her cheeks. Emma has nightmares sometimes. About her father. She asks me what he was like, and I show her photographs and tell her stories, but it's not enough. It's never enough. Her voice broke. She was 2 months old when he died. She never even met him. I know, I was there when he bought Captain Hoppy, a gift shop in Dubai the night before our last mission. He spent 45 minutes picking out the perfect rabbit, driving the rest of the team crazy. A ghost of a smile crossed Jack's face. He said his little girl was going to love it. Couldn't wait to see her face. He never saw her face. No, he didn't. They sat in silence, the weight of shared grief filling the space between them. Above their heads, the building's emergency systems hummed and clicked, maintaining the illusion of normalcy, while armed men regrouped for another assault. Victoria spoke first, her voice steadier now. Richard Conrad was our CFO for 12 years. My father trusted him. I trusted him. The bitterness in her words could have etched glass. 6 months ago, I discovered irregularities in our defense contracts. Money disappearing into shell companies. Classified technology being accessed without proper authorization. When I started investigating, I found $47 million missing, in a trail that led directly to foreign buyers. He's selling secrets. Worse, he's selling Project Aegis, a threat detection system that could revolutionize military defense, worth billions on the open market. Victoria's hands clenched into fists. When I confronted him, when I told him I was going to the authorities, he smiled at me, actually smiled. And then he told me what would happen to Emma if I said a single word to anyone. Jack's expression hardened. The mercenaries. Private contractors. Former military mostly. Loyal only to money. Victoria's voice dropped. He has connections everywhere, Jack. Police, federal agencies, the board of directors. I don't know who to trust anymore. You can trust me. I didn't even know you existed until this morning. You've been watching me for 7 years and I never knew. How is that not terrifying, invasive, obsessive? Jack didn't flinch from the accusations. I've asked myself those questions every day, whether I was honoring Michael's memory or just feeding my own guilt, whether I was protecting you or hiding from my own failures. Some debts can't be paid back. They can only be paid forward. But here's what I know for certain, Jack continued. Conrad has resources, connections, an army of hired killers. And right now you have me. One broken Marine with a handgun and a promise I intend to keep. Victoria met his eyes, really looked at him for the first time past the worn uniform and the weathered face to the steel beneath. Why should I trust a ghost? Because ghosts don't have anything left to lose. And because I made a promise to the only man I ever called brother. Jack extended his hand. Let me help you, Victoria. Let me finish what Michael started. She looked at his hand for a long moment. Then she took it. The alliance was formed in that concrete bunker, sealed with a handshake and the memory of a man they'd both loved in different ways. But the night was far from over. Even as they climbed the stairs back toward the main floors, Jack's mind was calculating, next steps anticipating, Conrad's response preparing for the escalation that was surely coming. They emerged into a scene of controlled chaos. Bradley Chen Morgan Technologies' 28-year-old tech consultant, sharing the common surname, through nothing more than the coincidence of Chicago's diverse population, was frantically working 3 different tablets, his young face illuminated by screens, showing security feeds, building schematics, and what appeared to be drone telemetry. Mrs. Chen, thank God. His relief was palpable. I've been trying to reach you. The security breach triggered our automated lockdown, but I've got thermal imaging from our surveillance drones. 4 hostiles in the North Corridor, 2 more at the loading dock. I can guide your security team remotely coordinate a... The building's power died. Every screen went black. Every light extinguished. The drones Bradley had been so proud of dropped from the sky like stones, their sophisticated electronics rendered useless by whatever EMP pulse Conrad's people had deployed. No, Bradley's voice was thin with disbelief. No, that's not possible. Our systems have redundant... Backup generators are offline too. Jack had already pulled out his compass, its brass casing catching the faint moonlight through the windows. In his other hand, he unfolded a paper map of the building, old creased, annotated in his own handwriting from months of studying the facility's layout. They hit the grid. Every electronic system in this building is dead. Bradley stared at the compass and map like they were artifacts from another century. That's a compass and a paper map. Works without batteries. Jack was already moving, orienting himself by the position of stars visible through the skylights. Gear doesn't win fights. Training does. But my drones, the thermal imaging, how are we supposed to coordinate without... The same way soldiers have coordinated for 3,000 years. Jack's voice cut through the younger man's panic like a blade. Eyes, ears, experience. He turned to Victoria. Secure room on the executive floor. It has mechanical locks, no electronics to disable. Take Bradley with you. What about you? Jack's smile held no warmth. I told you, I'm going hunting. He disappeared into the darkness before she could argue, moving through the building with the fluid confidence of a man who had spent months memorizing every corridor, every stairwell, every potential ambush point. Bradley's sophisticated technology had failed in seconds. Jack's methodology would not. The first century never saw him coming. Jack approached from a blind angle, using the building's architecture to mask his movement, timing his footsteps to coincide with the distant rumble of thunder outside. A sleeper hold applied with surgical precision rendered the man unconscious in 7 seconds, without a sound. 2 more guards patrolled the first-floor corridor, their night vision goggles giving them false confidence. Jack used that confidence against them, creating a distraction, a thrown piece of debris clattering against a far wall, then striking from the opposite direction while their attention was divided. The first went down to a blow that targeted the nerve cluster behind the ear. The second had time to turn to see the shadow coming for him before Jack's fist ended his night. Victor watched through backup surveillance that his team had established independent of the building's systems. His expression shifted from confident to concern to something approaching respect. Pull back, he ordered into his radio. That's not a security guard. Tier 1 operator. We need more men. His lieutenant's voice crackled through the static. What about Conrad's deadline? Victor's jaw tightened. Tell Conrad we're dealing with a professional. This just got expensive. Jack returned to the secure room where Victoria waited, her eyes widening at the blood on his knuckles, the controlled calm in his expression. Who are you? You know the difference between a soldier and a warrior. A soldier fights when ordered. A warrior fights when there's something worth protecting. Someone who keeps his promises, he said. Tonight, I'm a warrior. Dawn broke gray and sullen over Chicago, the October sky heavy with clouds that promised more rain. Maggie's diner had become an unlikely command post closed to regular customers, its windows covered with paper, its back rooms converted into a makeshift safe house. Emma slept on a cot in the storage room, Captain Hoppy clutched to her chest, her small face peaceful despite the chaos that had consumed her world. Beside her on a separate cot, Alex Miller slept with equal innocence, his inhaler on the pillow beside him, like a talisman against the darkness. Jack watched them through the doorway, these two children whose lives had become intertwined by circumstances neither could understand. His son, Michael's daughter, the next generation of a debt that kept compounding with interest. Maggie pressed a cup of coffee into his hands. Real coffee, not the instant stuff he'd been surviving on for months. You look like death warmed over. Feel like it too. The woman, Mrs. Chen, she's something else. Spent the last 3 hours on her laptop coordinating with lawyers and accountants and God knows who else. Maggie's weathered face softened. She also paid off your entire tab and left money for Alex's medication. 6 months worth. Jack's hand tightened on the coffee cup. I didn't ask for... No, you didn't. That's why she did it. Maggie nodded toward the main room. She wants to talk to you, said it's important. Victoria sat at the corner booth, the same booth where Jack had given away his breakfast yesterday morning, though it felt like a lifetime ago. Her laptop was open, screens of data scrolling past, but her attention was fixed on a leather folder that lay closed before her. Detective Maria Santos, she said without preamble, as Jack slid into the seat across from her. Chicago PD Organized Crime Unit. She's been investigating Conrad for 18 months. Someone inside his organization has been feeding her information. Can she be trusted? I don't know, but she's our best option for getting law enforcement involved without triggering Conrad's network of informants. Victoria pushed the folder across the table. There's something else. Something you need to see. Jack opened the folder. Inside was a photograph, old faded, showing a group of military personnel in desert camouflage. He recognized the image immediately. It was the same photograph that hung on his apartment wall. Where did you get this? From Michael's personal effects. The Army returned them to me after the funeral, but I couldn't look at them. Not for years. Victoria's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. I finally went through the box last night, looking for anything that might help me understand what's happening. And I found this. She pointed to one of the figures in the photograph. That's Michael. And that, her finger moved to the man standing beside him, arm slung around Michael's shoulders. That's you. Jack nodded slowly. The day before our last mission, someone's wife sent a care package with a camera. Michael insisted on a team photo, said he wanted to remember what we looked like before things went sideways. There's writing on the back. Victoria's voice cracked. Michael's handwriting. Jack turned the photograph over. The script was familiar, Michael's careful, precise letters, the way he'd written everything from after-action reports to love letters. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home. I'm sorry, Vicky. I'm sorry for every birthday I'll miss, every dance recital, every moment of our daughter's life that I won't be there for. But I need you to know something. The man in this photo, Jack Miller, is the best person I've ever known. If I had to choose someone to watch over you and Emma, it would be him. Always. Find him if you need help. Trust him with your life. Trust him with Emma's life. He's family. Michael, the words blurred as Jack's vision swam. He hadn't cried since Sarah's funeral, hadn't allowed himself that weakness. But reading Michael's handwriting, hearing his voice echo across 7 years of silence. He knew. Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. He knew he might not come back, and he chose you. Jack closed his eyes, the photograph pressed against his chest like a shield. He shouldn't have. I couldn't save him. I should have been faster, should have seen the ambush coming. Stop. Victoria's hand covered his warm and firm. Michael made a choice. He chose to cover your extraction. He chose to give you time to save the rest of your team. That's not failure, Jack. That's sacrifice. The measure of a man isn't how he fights, it's what he fights for. Victoria's words hung in the air between them, reframing everything Jack had believed about that night in Kandahar. Not failure, sacrifice, not guilt, honor. I've spent 7 years blaming myself, Jack said quietly. 7 years watching from the shadows, because I thought I didn't deserve to be part of your lives. Because I thought my failure had cost Michael his life, and I couldn't face that. And now I know the truth. Michael didn't die because I failed. He died making a choice, the same choice he would have made 1,000 times over. He died being exactly who he was. Jack's voice steadied, and he asked me to take care of his family. Not as penance, not as punishment, as a gift. Victoria's hand found his again, their fingers intertwining naturally. Then take care of us, Jack. Not from the shadows, not from a distance, as part of our lives. I don't know how to do that. Neither do I. Her smile was crooked, vulnerable, beautiful. But I think we can figure it out together. Before Jack could respond, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered with the ingrained caution of a man who had learned to treat every unknown contact as a potential threat. Mr. Miller. The voice was smooth-cultured, dripping with the confidence of old money and older privilege. Richard Conrad. I believe we have some matters to discuss. Jack's entire body went rigid. His free hand moved toward his weapon, an instinctive response to the sound of an enemy's voice. How did you get this number? I have many resources, Master Sergeant. Did you think my research would stop at employment records and credit histories? Conrad's laugh was soft, almost genial. I know who you are. I know about your service record, impressive, by the way. I know about your wife's cancer, your son's medical condition, the $47 in your checking account. Pa, I know you haven't eaten a real meal in 3 weeks, until yesterday, that is. Quite touching, giving your breakfast to a stranger's child. What do you want, Conrad? Simply to propose a business arrangement. You're a skilled man. Valuable. I have considerable resources at my disposal. Whatever Victoria is paying you, and I suspect she's paying you nothing, I can triple it, quadruple it, enough to pay off your debts, fund your son's treatment, give you the life you deserve. Jack's jaw tightened. And in exchange, you walk away, take Victoria's money, take mine, take whatever makes you comfortable, but walk away tonight, disappear like the ghost you've been pretending to be. And if I refuse, the genial mask dropped from Conrad's voice, revealing something cold and reptilian beneath. Then I'll be forced to take a more direct approach. Your son is a lovely boy, Mr. Miller. Those asthma attacks must be terrifying for him. Struggling to breathe, lungs burning, the world going gray around the edges. It would be tragic if something happened to exacerbate his condition. Hospitals can be so dangerous for vulnerable children. Jack's blood turned to ice. He met Victoria's eyes across the table, saw her face go pale as she read the murder in his expression. If you touch my son, 12 hours. Conrad's voice was silk over steel. You have 12 hours to make your decision. After that, I take both children, Emma and Alex, and I promise you, Mr. Miller, I won't be gentle. The line went dead. For a long moment, Jack sat motionless, the phone still pressed to his ear, his mind processing the threat with the clinical detachment of a soldier assessing battlefield conditions. Conrad had made a fatal error. He thought he was dealing with a desperate father, a broken veteran, someone who could be intimidated into compliance. He was wrong. Jack set down the phone and looked at Victoria. Do you trust me? Yes. Then I need you to do exactly what I say. No questions, no hesitation. Can you do that? Victoria nodded, her face pale but determined. Good. First we secure the children. Maggie has a network people from the old neighborhood who owe her favors. We move Alex and Emma every 4 hours, different locations, different routes. Conrad's people can't track what they can't predict. And then we take the fight to him. Jack stood, his entire bearing shifting into something harder, more dangerous. The security guard was gone completely now. In his place stood the Marine Raider, the Special Operations warrior, the man who had survived 3 combat tours and walked out of Kandahar when better soldiers had fallen. Conrad thinks he's hunting us. He's wrong. From this moment on, we're hunting him. Victoria rose to meet him. I have resources, access to Morgan's systems even with Conrad's security lockdown. If I can get into the mainframe, I can find evidence of his transactions. Proof of the embezzlement, the technology transfers everything he's been hiding. Do it, but not from any location he might expect. We need mobile capability, encrypted communications. The diner's back door opened. Jack's weapon was in his hand before the hinges finished creaking, aimed at the entrance with deadly precision. The man who stepped through was older, military straight, despite his civilian clothes. His face was weathered by decades of command, his eyes sharp with an intelligence that missed nothing. On his chest, barely visible beneath his jacket, the ribbons and insignia of a career soldier who had risen through the ranks on merit rather than politics. Colonel James Patterson, Jack's former commanding officer, the man who knew the truth about Kandahar. "Stand down, Master Sergeant." Patterson's voice carried the authority of a lifetime of leadership. "I'm not here to fight." Jack didn't lower his weapon. "How did you find us?" "I still have contacts in the intelligence community. When Richard Conrad started moving mercenaries through Chicago, people noticed. When those mercenaries started chasing the CEO of a major defense contractor," Patterson's eyes flicked to Victoria. "People called me. And you just happened to be in Chicago. I live 40 miles away, retired to a lake house 3 years ago." Patterson stepped further into the diner, his hands visible, his posture deliberately non-threatening. "I've been watching this situation develop for months, Jack, waiting to see if you'd need help." "I didn't ask for your help." "No, you never do." Patterson's expression softened. "That's always been your problem. You carry everything alone, convinced that asking for assistance is some kind of weakness." Michael was the same way. The mention of Michael's name cut through Jack's hostility. He lowered his weapon, though he didn't holster it. "What do you want, Colonel, to settle a debt?" Patterson moved to the counter, accepting the coffee Maggie silently offered. "Kandahar wasn't just a mission failure, Jack. It was a betrayal. Someone sold out your team, gave the enemy your route, your timing, your objective. 4 good Marines died because someone wanted them dead." Jack's blood turned to ice. "You knew this." "I suspected. For years I suspected. But I couldn't prove anything, and the investigation was buried by people with more stars on their shoulders than I had." Patterson's jaw tightened. 2 months ago, I finally got confirmation. The intelligence leak that killed your team, it came from inside. Someone connected to the weapons technology you were trying to intercept." Victoria stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Project Aegis. Conrad's been selling classified technology to foreign buyers. Not just selling it, building it." Patterson set down his coffee cup. "Richard Conrad has been positioning himself for years, moving pieces into place. Your husband's team, Mrs. Chen, they weren't just casualties of a botched mission. They were targeted, eliminated to protect the larger operation." The revelation hit Jack like a physical blow. All these years, he'd blamed himself for failing to save Michael, for not seeing the ambush coming, for being too slow, too weak, too human. But it wasn't his failure, it was betrayal, murder. And the man responsible was currently threatening his son. Jack turned to Victoria. "Conrad, he wasn't just your CFO, he was connected to the people who sold out our team." "I didn't know." Victoria's voice was hollow. "I swear, Jack, I had no idea." "I believe you, but that means this isn't just about protecting Emma anymore. It's about justice for Michael, for everyone who died because of Conrad's greed." Patterson nodded. "I can provide intelligence on Conrad's location, his security arrangements, his connections in law enforcement and the federal government." He paused. "I can also delay official response when things get messy. Old favors called in from old friends. And in exchange, you let me help. This isn't just your fight, Jack. Michael was my soldier. Those 4 Marines were my responsibility. I've been carrying that weight just as long as you have." Jack looked at Patterson, at Victoria, at the sleeping children visible through the storage room doorway. He thought about Michael's photograph, the message written on the back. "Trust him with your life. Trust him with Emma's life. He's family." If we do this, Jack said slowly, there's no going back. Conrad has resources, connections, an army of mercenaries. We're three people against all of that. Three people with training, motivation, and nothing left to lose. Patterson's eyes hardened. Conrad thinks he's untouchable. He's wrong. Victoria stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Jack. I can access Morgan's systems remotely, get you eyes inside whatever location Conrad is using as his base. Financial records, communication logs, everything he thought was buried. How long do you need? 3 hours, maybe 4. Jack checked his watch. 9 hours until Conrad's deadline. Barely enough time to plan to prepare to transform from prey into predators. But it would have to be enough. All right, Jack extended his hand to Patterson. Semper Fi, Colonel. Patterson gripped it firmly. Semper Fi, Master Sergeant. They turned to the task ahead, three warriors united by loss and purpose. The War Council had begun. Over the next 3 hours, the back room of Maggie's diner transformed into an operations center. Maps covered the table's satellite imagery of Conrad's suspected locations, building schematics pulled from city records, traffic patterns, and police patrol routes. Victoria worked her laptop with furious intensity, her fingers flying across keys as she navigated corporate firewalls and encrypted databases. Patterson contributed intelligence from his network. Former soldiers, current contractors, anyone who owed him favors accumulated over 30 years of service. Conrad's primary location emerged from the data, a warehouse complex on Chicago's South Side, ostensibly a storage facility for Morgan Technologies, but actually a private fortress equipped with military-grade security. 6 confirmed mercenaries, Patterson said, pointing to marked positions on the satellite image. Viktor Morozov commanding. He's dangerous Alpha Group veteran combat experience in Chechnya and Georgia. Don't underestimate him. I don't underestimate anyone. Jack studied the imagery, memorizing entry points and fields of fire. What about Conrad himself? 2nd floor, office suite with reinforced walls and bulletproof glass. He'll stay there until he's certain the situation is resolved. Then we make sure he's not certain about anything. Victoria looked up from her laptop, her face illuminated by the screen's glow. I'm in. Full access to Morgan's financial systems. I can see everything, every transaction, every shell company, every dollar that's flowed through Conrad's network. Her voice sharpened with barely contained fury. He's been stealing from us for 12 years, Jack. 12 years of systematically bleeding the company while I trusted him like family. Can you prove it? I can do better than prove it. Victoria's smile held an edge that hadn't been there before. I can expose it. Broadcast it to every regulatory agency, every news organization, every financial institution that's ever done business with Morgan Technologies. One button, and Richard Conrad's empire comes crashing down. Not yet, Jack's voice was calm but firm. We need to time this carefully. If Conrad realizes he's exposed before we reach him, he'll run, or worse, he'll destroy the evidence. Victoria nodded, her brief flare of triumph banking into strategic patience. When then? When I have the children safe. When Victor and his men are neutralized. When Conrad has nowhere left to go. Jack met her eyes. Then you burn his world down. The plan came together piece by piece, each element fitting into place like components of a precision weapon. Patterson would coordinate with his contacts, ensuring that police response to the warehouse complex would be mysteriously delayed. Victoria would maintain remote access to Morgan's systems, ready to unleash the evidence at Jack's signal. And Jack himself would do what he'd been trained to do: infiltrate, neutralize, and extract. But something still nagged at him, a detail that didn't fit the pattern. Conrad's smart. Jack traced the warehouse perimeter on the satellite image. He knows we'll come for him. Why stay in one location? Why not run? Because he thinks he's holding all the cards. Patterson's voice was thoughtful. The children, the mercenaries, the connections in law enforcement. He doesn't believe anyone can touch him. No, it's more than that. Jack's instincts, honed by 18 years of combat, were screaming warnings he couldn't quite articulate. He's waiting for something, setting a trap. Victoria looked up sharply. A trap for us. Maybe, or maybe, Jack's phone buzzed. Unknown number, different than before. He answered cautiously. Yes, Mr. Miller, a woman's voice, professional with the clipped cadence of law enforcement. This is Detective Maria Santos, Chicago PD. We need to talk. Jack's eyes met Patterson's across the room. How did you get this number? I have my sources, same as everyone else in this mess. Santos's voice carried a note of dry humor. I've been investigating Richard Conrad for 18 months. His mercenary captain, Viktor Morozov, used to be one of my informants. Keyword being used to. What happened? He found a better offer. But before he switched sides, he told me something interesting. Santos paused. He told me Conrad isn't just buying and selling weapons technology. He's working with the same network that compromised American operations in Afghanistan 6 years ago. Jack's grip on the phone tightened. Kandahar. So you do know. I wondered. Santos's voice softened slightly. I've read your file, Master Sergeant. The classified portions, anyway. I know what happened to your team. And I know you've been protecting Mrs. Chen and her daughter for years. What do you want, Detective? Same thing you do. To stop Conrad. To get justice for the people he's killed. A pause. And maybe to make sure Victor doesn't hurt anyone else before this is over. Jack considered the offer, weighing risks against potential benefits. Another ally meant additional resources, additional perspectives. But it also meant additional variables, additional unknowns, additional opportunities for betrayal. Can you be at Maggie's diner in 30 minutes? Already on my way. The line went dead. Jack set down the phone and looked at his assembled team. We have a new player, Detective Santos, organized crime. She claims she's been investigating Conrad. Claims, Patterson raised an eyebrow. Everyone claims something. The question is whether it's true. Jack checked his weapon, his movements automatic after years of repetition. She'll be here in 30 minutes. If she's legitimate, she might be useful. If she's not, he didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone in the room understood what happened to threats. Victoria rose from her laptop, stretching muscles cramped from hours of work. The children will wake soon. We should move them before Detective Santos arrives. Fewer variables. Agreed. Jack moved toward the storage room, his footsteps silent on the worn linoleum. I'll get them ready. Patterson, secure the perimeter. We don't know who Santos might have talked to, what trail she might have left. The old colonel nodded, already moving toward the door. Consider it done. Alone in the storage room doorway, Jack watched his son sleep. Alex's chest rose and fell in peaceful rhythm, the inhaler clutched in his small hand, his face slack with the complete trust that only children possessed. Barsiam, Emma stirred slightly, her grip on Captain Hoppy tightening, as if even in sleep she sensed the dangers gathering around her. The weight of protecting them pressed against his chest, not a burden, but a purpose. Jack knelt beside the cots, his hand gentle on his son's shoulder. Hey, buddy, time to wake up. Alex's eyes fluttered open, momentary confusion giving way to recognition. Dad, is it morning? Almost. We need to move to a different place for a while. Can you do that for me? The boy nodded, his young face solemn with understanding he shouldn't have possessed. Are the bad men still out there? Jack hesitated, weighing truth against comfort. Alex deserved honesty, had always deserved more than the half-truths Jack fed him to preserve fragile innocence. Yes, he admitted, but I'm going to stop them. Tonight. And then we'll be safe. And then we'll be safe. Alex processed this with the gravity of a child forced to grow up too fast. Emma's nice, he said, finally glancing at the sleeping girl. She let me play with Captain Hoppy. He only has one eye, but she says that makes him special. Jack felt something loosen in his chest, a knot of tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. His son and Michael's daughter connected already despite everything. Yeah, buddy, I think they're both pretty special. He gathered the children, moved them to the secondary location Maggie had arranged, and returned to the diner just as Detective Santos's unmarked sedan pulled into the parking lot. The sun was setting over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. In a few hours, Jack would infiltrate Conrad's warehouse. In a few hours, everything would change. But for now, there was planning to do, intelligence to gather, a team to forge from strangers united by common purpose. Jack watched Santos approach the diner entrance, his hand resting near his weapon, his eyes cataloging every detail of her appearance and bearing. She was tall, athletic, with the kind of watchful alertness that came from years on the street. Her badge caught the fading sunlight, flashing like a warning or a promise. The next phase of the operation was about to begin. The warehouse complex sprawled across 3 acres of Chicago's industrial wasteland, a monument to decay, wrapped in chain-link fencing and razor wire. Sodium lights cast pools of sickly orange across cracked asphalt and rusted shipping containers, creating a patchwork of illumination and shadow that would have challenged even the most sophisticated surveillance systems. Jack Miller crouched in the darkness beyond the perimeter, his black tactical gear blending seamlessly with the October night, his breath forming thin clouds in the cold air. 9 hours had passed since Conrad's threat. 3 hours since Detective Santos had joined their unlikely alliance, bringing with her detailed blueprints of the warehouse's interior and the locations of Victor's security checkpoints. 2 hours since Victoria had completed her remote infiltration of Morgan's financial systems, her finger hovering over the button that would expose 12 years of Conrad's crimes to the world. Now, with the deadline approaching and the stakes higher than they had ever been, Jack prepared to do what he had been trained to do, what he had spent 7 years trying to forget. Before moving, he keyed his comms one final time. Maggie confirmed status. The old woman's voice crackled back immediately. Both angels sleeping. Perimeter secure. Go do what you need to do. Jack exhaled slowly. Safe. The children were safe. He could focus on the mission ahead. What he didn't know was that Victor had been watching Maggie's network for 6 hours, tracking patterns, identifying vulnerabilities, waiting for exactly this moment, waiting for the Guardian to leave his post. The comms unit in his ear crackled with Victoria's voice steady, despite the fear Jack knew she must be feeling. I have eyes on the building through the security feeds I've accessed. 6 hostiles confirmed. Victor is stationed at the north entrance. Conrad is in his second-floor office, exactly where Patterson said he'd be. Jack keyed his response, keeping his voice barely above a whisper. What about backup systems, emergency protocols? I've isolated their communications. They can't call for reinforcements without going through me first. A pause. Jack, there's something else. The feeds show a 7th heat signature on the second floor. Small, child-sized. His blood froze. Emma, I don't know. Maggie confirmed both children are still at the safe house, but this signature appeared 20 minutes ago. Someone brought a child into that building. Jack's mind raced through possibilities, each more horrifying than the last. Conrad had promised to take both children if Jack didn't comply. Had he found the safe house? Had Victor's people somehow tracked Maggie's network? Patterson's voice cut through the channel. I'm reaching out to our contacts at the safe house now. Hold position. 30 seconds stretched into eternity. Jack's hand tightened on his weapon, every muscle coiled with tension that screamed for release. If Conrad had Alex, if anything had happened to his son, confirmed. Patterson's voice carried a note of relief. Both children are secure. Maggie's people are with them. Whatever's on that second floor, it's not Alex or Emma. Jack exhaled slowly, forcing his heart rate back under control. Then Conrad's using a decoy, trying to bait me into making a mistake. Or he has another hostage we don't know about. Victoria's voice was grim. Either way, we need to move carefully. Understood. Jack studied the perimeter one final time, memorizing the patrol patterns he had observed over the past hour. 2 guards walked the fence line in opposite directions, their routes intersecting every 8 minutes at the main gate. A 3rd guard manned the loading dock, his attention divided between the entrance and the cigarette he was trying to smoke without being seen by his superiors. 8 minutes. That was the window. Jack moved. The 1st guard never saw him coming. Jack approached from a blind angle created by a stack of shipping containers, timing his footsteps to coincide with the distant rumble of a freight train passing on tracks half a mile away. A sleeper hold applied with the precision of thousands of hours of training rendered the man unconscious in 7 seconds. Jack lowered him gently to the ground, secured his hands with zip ties, and moved on. The 2nd guard was more alert, his head swiveling at every sound, his hand never far from the radio clipped to his vest. Jack watched him for 30 seconds, identifying the pattern of his paranoia, the predictable way his attention cycled between potential threats. When the guard turned to check the shadows behind him, Jack struck from the opposite direction. A palm strike to the nerve cluster at the base of the skull, a controlled fall to prevent noise, another set of zip ties. 2 down, 4 to go plus Victor. The loading dock guard was distracted by his cigarette, cupping his hand around the ember to shield it from the wind. Jack circled around, using the dock's concrete pillars for concealment, closing the distance with the patient inevitability of a predator. The guard had time to register movements in his peripheral vision, time to begin reaching for his weapon before Jack's fist ended his participation in the evening's events. 3 down, the path to the main building was clear. Jack slipped through a service entrance that Patterson's blueprints had identified, finding himself in a corridor of exposed pipes and humming electrical systems. The building's infrastructure groaned around him, decades of industrial use leaving their marks in rust stains and water damage. He moved through the maze with the quiet confidence of a man who had spent months studying every possible route, every potential ambush point, every advantage the environment could offer. The fourth guard was patrolling the first-floor hallway, his boots echoing on concrete, his night vision goggles giving him false confidence in his ability to see threats coming. Jack used that confidence against him, staying just outside the goggles' effective range, timing his approach to coincide with the guard's predictable turning patterns. A wrist lock, a leverage throw, a controlled impact with the wall. 4 seconds, 4 down. The fifth guard was smarter. He had positioned himself at the base of the stairwell leading to the second floor. His weapon raised his posture, suggesting awareness that something was wrong. The others had stopped checking in on the radio. The pattern had broken. Jack assessed the situation from behind a support column, calculating angles and options. Direct approach would be costly. The guard had clear sight lines on both approaches to the stairwell. But there were other ways. A fire extinguisher hung on the wall 20 feet to his left. Jack moved to it silently, his fingers finding the pin without looking. He pulled it free, aimed the nozzle toward the opposite corner of the room, and squeezed. The chemical spray created an instant cloud of white billowing across the space with surprising speed. The guard's attention snapped toward the disturbance, his weapon tracking the movement, his night vision goggles suddenly useless in the chemical fog. Jack was already behind him before the guard realized his mistake. A strike to the throat to silence any cry for help, followed by a knee to the solar plexus that doubled the man over, followed by an elbow to the temple that ended consciousness. 5 down. One more guard, then Victor, then Conrad. The sixth guard was waiting at the top of the stairwell, positioned behind an overturned desk that served as improvised cover. He had heard the commotion below, had called for Victor on the radio, had prepared himself for whatever was coming up those stairs. Jack didn't use the stairs. The building's ventilation system ran through the ceiling, ancient ductwork that groaned and protested, but held his weight. Jack crawled through the confined space, navigating by memory and the distant sound of the guard's nervous breathing. A vent cover gave him access to the hallway behind the guard's position, a blind spot created by the man's focus on the stairwell. The guard never knew Jack had already passed his position. 6 down, Victor and Conrad remained. Jack keyed his comms, hostiles neutralized, moving to the second floor. Victoria's response was immediate. Victor's position has changed. He's not at the north entrance anymore. The feeds show him moving toward Conrad's office. He knows I'm here. Be careful, Jack. He was always careful. Careful was how you survived 3 combat tours and an ambush that killed 4 of your closest friends. Careful was how you raised a son alone while carrying the weight of promises you could never fully honor. Careful was a habit so deeply ingrained that it had become instinct. But careful didn't mean hesitant, and it didn't mean slow. Jack moved through the second floor with predatory efficiency, checking corners and clearing rooms in a pattern burned into his memory. The child-sized heat signature Victoria had identified was coming from a room at the end of the corridor past Conrad's office, past whatever trap Victor was setting. He reached Conrad's door first. Reinforced steel, bulletproof glass in the small window, exactly as Patterson had described. Through the glass, Jack could see the man himself. Richard Conrad, 55 years old, silver-haired, impeccably dressed despite the hour. He sat behind his desk with the casual confidence of someone who believed himself untouchable. A glass of scotch in his hand, a smile playing at the corners of his lips. Their eyes met through the glass. Conrad raised his glass in a mocking toast, then pressed a button on his desk. The door swung open, an invitation that felt more like a trap. Jack entered anyway. Master Sergeant Miller. Conrad's voice was smooth-cultured, carrying the accent of old money and prep school educations. I wondered when you would arrive. My men said you were impressive, but I confess I didn't fully believe them until I watched you dismantle my security on the cameras. He gestured toward a bank of monitors on the wall. Quite the performance. Jack kept his weapon trained on Conrad's center mass, scanning the room for threats. It's over, Conrad. Your men are down. Victoria has access to every transaction you've ever made. In about 5 minutes, every regulatory agency and news organization in the country is going to know exactly what kind of man you are. Will they? Conrad's smile didn't waver. And what kind of man am I? Master Sergeant A, businessman, a patriot, a survivor. He set down his scotch with deliberate care. You know, I've studied you. Your service record, your personal history, the tragedy of your wife's death. You're a fascinating specimen. A man of exceptional ability reduced to poverty and obscurity by a system that doesn't value sacrifice. I didn't come here for a therapy session. No, you came here for justice, vengeance, closure. Conrad leaned forward, his eyes glittering with something that might have been admiration or contempt. But here's what you don't understand, Jack. Justice is a luxury. Vengeance is a distraction. And closure is a myth we tell ourselves to make the nightmares bearable. Where's the child? Conrad's expression, flickered surprise, quickly masked. Child, don't. Jack's voice hardened. We detected a heat signature. Child-sized. You brought someone into this building who, for the first time, genuine uncertainty crossed Conrad's face. I have no idea what you're talking about. My only leverage was the threat of taking your son and Emma. I never actually... His words were cut off by the sound of a door opening behind Jack. Footsteps professional and measured, accompanied by the soft whimper of a child trying very hard not to cry. Jack turned. Viktor Morozov stood in the doorway, his weapon drawn, his expression carved from the same granite that decorated Soviet war memorials. In front of him, held firmly by the collar of his jacket, was Alex Miller. The boy's face was pale with terror, his inhaler clutched in his trembling hand, his eyes fixed on his father with desperate hope. Dad, Alex's voice cracked on the single syllable. Jack's world narrowed to a single point of focus. His son, his 8-year-old son, who should have been safe at the safe house, who should have been protected by Maggie's network, who should have been anywhere but here in the hands of a man trained to kill without hesitation. The woman at the safe house, Maggie, she is loyal but predictable. Victor's voice was calm, almost apologetic. I have worked in this city for 6 months. I know its people, its patterns, its secrets. Finding your backup location took 2 hours once you left. Extracting the boy took 30 seconds. Jack's mind raced through options, calculating angles and distances and probabilities. Victor had positioned himself perfectly, Alex in front as a shield weapon, aimed at the boy's head, stance balanced to respond to any sudden movement. A direct attack would be suicide. A negotiation might buy time but wouldn't change the fundamental equation. Conrad had recovered his composure, his smile returning with renewed confidence. You see, Master Sergeant, this is what I meant about justice being a luxury. You had me. You genuinely had me. And now, he spread his hands in a gesture of mock helplessness. Now we're back where we started, me holding all the cards. You holding nothing but a gun you can't use. Let him go. Jack's voice was steady despite the chaos in his chest. He's 8 years old. He has nothing to do with any of this. On the contrary, he has everything to do with it. Conrad rose from his desk, adjusting his cuffs with the casual precision of a man preparing for a board meeting. You destroyed my operation tonight, Miller. 6 of my best men taken out by a single aging Marine. That demands consequences. Examples. His eyes hardened. Victor, take the boy to the car. We're relocating to the secondary. No. The word came from Victor, not Jack. The Russian mercenary's expression had shifted, something complicated, moving behind his eyes, something that looked almost like conflict. Conrad's composure cracked. Excuse me. I said no. Victor's weapon remained steady, but his voice carried a new edge. The boy is not part of this. I was hired to neutralize threats, not to... He paused, searching for words. This is not what I agreed to. You agreed to follow orders. I agreed to professional work, soldier's work. Victor's jaw tightened. What you are proposing is not soldier's work. It is murder of a child. That is something I will not do. Jack watched the exchange with careful attention, recognizing the fracture opening between employer and employee. Victor was a professional, a dangerous one certainly, but a professional nonetheless. And professionals had codes, lines they wouldn't cross, ethics that separated them from the monsters who signed their checks. Victor, Jack's voice was quiet, steady, carrying the weight of shared experience. You were Alpha Group. I know what that means. I know the training, the discipline, the honor they tried to instill. This isn't who you are. Do not presume to know who I am. I know you have limits. I know you didn't take this job to hurt children. Jack met the Russian's eyes directly, warrior to warrior. Let my son go. Walk away. This doesn't have to end with more blood. Victor was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Alex whimpered in his grip, the sound cutting through the tension like a blade. Then Conrad pulled a weapon from his desk drawer, a compact pistol chrome-plated and obviously expensive, and aimed it at Victor's back. Let me make this simple. Release the boy and I shoot you. Keep the boy and you get to live long enough to renegotiate your contract. The calculation in Victor's eyes shifted, self-preservation warring against professional ethics, survival against honor. Jack didn't wait for the conclusion. Alex, his voice cut through the standoff with the sharp clarity of a command. Remember what I taught you when Daddy says, now, what do you do? The boy's eyes widened with sudden understanding. 8 years old, terrified, but smart enough to recognize the signal they had practiced in the apartment a dozen times. A game, Jack had called it, a way to stay safe if bad things ever happen. Now, Alex went completely limp, becoming dead weight in Victor's grip. The sudden shift in balance threw the mercenary off-center for half a second, just long enough for his hold on the boy to break, just long enough for Alex to drop toward the floor. Jack's hand was already moving, drawing the knife from his ankle sheath arm, cocking back in a motion practiced 10,000 times on training ranges and battlefields across 3 continents. The blade left his fingers with perfect rotation, crossing the distance between them, faster than conscious thought could follow. Victor's weapon hand. The knife struck the wrist with surgical precision, forcing his fingers to spasm open the gun, clattering to the floor, as the mercenary roared in pain and surprise. Jack was already closing the distance, 3 strides that covered the space between them in less than 2 seconds. Conrad's pistol was coming up, seeking a target, but Jack was faster than a businessman who had never faced real combat, faster than a man whose experience with violence came from giving orders rather than executing them. Elbow strike to Conrad's solar plexus. The pistol went flying as the CEO doubled over, all pretense of control, dissolving in a gasp of agony. Jack didn't pause, couldn't pause, not with Victor, still a threat, not with Alex, still on the floor. The Russian had pulled the knife from his wrist, his face contorted with pain, but his combat instincts still sharp. He lunged forward, blade extended, aiming for Jack's throat. Jack met him head on. The 2 warriors collided in a brutal exchange of strikes and counters, years of training on both sides creating a dance of violence that lasted only seconds, but felt like hours. Victor was good, very good, his Alpha Group training evident in every movement, but Jack had something he lacked. Jack was fighting for his son. A father's fury carried no limitations. Jack absorbed a strike to his ribs, used the impact to generate momentum, and drove his elbow into Victor's already wounded arm. The mercenary screamed his defense, faltering for a crucial instant. Jack followed with a knee to the midsection, a palm strike to the jaw, and a final blow that dropped Victor to the floor in a heap of unconscious muscle. Conrad was crawling toward his fallen pistol, his movements desperate and undignified. Jack reached him in 3 steps, kicked the weapon away, and pressed his boot against the CEO's spine with enough pressure to make the message clear. Stay down. You have no authority. This is assault. This is justice. Jack's voice was ice. Stay down, or I'll give you a matching set of broken ribs. Conrad went still. Jack turned to his son, dropping to his knees beside the boy, his hands gentle, despite the violence still singing in his veins. Alex, hey buddy, look at me. Alex's eyes opened, tears streaming down his face, his small body trembling with shock and relief. Dad, I was so scared. They grabbed me from Mrs. Chen's and I couldn't. I know, buddy. Jack pulled his son into his arms, holding him tight, feeling the desperate grip of small hands clutching his tactical vest. It's over now. You're safe. I've got you. I did what you said. When you said now, I went limp like a noodle. Despite everything, Jack almost laughed. You did perfect, soldier. Absolutely perfect. Victoria's voice cut through the comms, fierce with triumph. Jack, I'm uploading now. Every transaction, every shell company, every dollar he stole, it's going live. On the monitors behind Conrad's desk, screens flickered and changed. Financial records scrolled across every display in the building. News tickers appeared in the corner, breaking alerts, federal notifications, the digital infrastructure of Conrad's empire collapsing in real time. Conrad turned slowly, watching his world crumble across a dozen screens. His face went ashen, the arrogant confidence draining away like water from a broken vessel. What have you done? His voice cracked. Justice, Jack said, the kind money can't buy. Detective Santos's voice crackled through the comms. Jack, I'm 3 minutes out with backup. Patterson has confirmed the police response is now authorized. It's really over. It's really over. Jack held Alex for a long moment, listening to his son's heartbeat gradually slow from terror to something approaching calm. Around them, the warehouse groaned and settled, indifferent to the violence that had unfolded within its walls. Conrad lay motionless beneath Jack's boot, his empire crumbling with every passing second. Then Patterson's voice came through the comms, carrying a weight that made Jack's blood run cold. Jack, there's something else. Before the operation began, I received a package from an old contact in military intelligence, something that was classified until 3 days ago. What is it? Michael's helmet camera, the footage from Kandahar. It was recovered from the site after the mission and buried in classified archives for 7 years. Patterson's voice was heavy. It shows everything, Jack. Michael's last moments, his last words, everything. The warehouse's second floor had a small conference room that Santos's people cleared and secured for evidence processing. Jack sat in a metal chair, Alex asleep on a cot nearby, exhaustion having finally overcome the boy's terror. Victoria stood beside him, her hand resting on his shoulder, her presence a warmth he hadn't realized he needed. Patterson connected his laptop to the room's ancient projector, the image flickering and stabilizing on a stained white wall. The footage was grainy, the audio distorted by distance and the chaos of combat, but the images were unmistakable. Afghanistan, night, muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness like hellish lightning. The sounds of gunfire and screaming and the desperate calls of men fighting for their lives. Michael Hayes appeared on screen, his face streaked with blood and dirt, his breathing ragged. He was propped against a crumbling wall, his body positioned to cover the extraction route his team was using. In the distance, Jack could see himself younger, desperate, dragging a wounded teammate toward the helicopter that would carry them to safety. Michael's voice came through the speakers, weak but clear. Jack, if you're seeing this, I'm gone. Good, means the mission worked. A pained smile crossed his blood-flecked lips. The intel is secured, the team is safe. You did your job, brother, just like I knew you would. Victoria's hand tightened on Jack's shoulder. Tears were streaming down her face, but she made no sound. On the screen, Michael coughed blood appearing at the corner of his mouth. Now I need you to do one more thing. Vicky and Emma, they're yours to protect now. Not because I'm asking, not because you owe me anything. His eyes, even through the grainy footage, carried a fierce intensity. Because you're the only one I trust. You're the best man I know, Jack. You always were. He's wrong. The words escaped Jack's lips before he could stop them. I wasn't good enough. I should have. Shut up and listen. Patterson's voice was gentle but firm. He wasn't done. Michael's image continued. And Jack, that little rabbit I sent Captain Hoppy, tell Emma her daddy loves her. Tell her I'll always be watching. Tell her, his voice cracked, emotion breaking through the soldier's facade. Tell her to be brave. Like you. Like her mama. The footage flickered static, eating at the edges of the frame. Michael's breathing was becoming more labored, his time running out. One more thing, brother. The leak, the one that sold us out, it goes higher than Conrad. Higher than any of us knew. Someone in Washington. Someone with stars on their shoulders. Michael's jaw tightened with the effort of speaking. Don't let them win, Jack. Don't let them bury this. Find the truth. For me, for the team, for everyone The image dissolved into static, the audio cutting out mid-sentence. Silence filled the conference room, broken only by the soft sound of Victoria's crying and the distant murmur of police activity elsewhere in the building. Jack stared at the frozen static on the wall, his face wet with tears he didn't remember shedding. 7 years. 7 years of guilt and self-recrimination and believing he had failed his best friend. And the entire time Michael had been proud of him, had trusted him, had loved him like the brother neither of them had ever had by blood. He knew. Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. He knew he wasn't going to make it, and he spent his last moments thinking about us, about you. That was Michael. Patterson's voice was rough with emotion, always taking care of his people right to the end. Jack closed his eyes, letting the grief wash through him, not the poisoned grief of guilt and failure, but something cleaner, something that felt almost like peace. Michael hadn't died blaming Jack for not saving him. Michael had died grateful that Jack had saved the others, that the mission had succeeded, that his family would be protected. Promises made to the dead are the hardest to keep, but they're the ones that matter most. There's more. Patterson's voice cut through the moment. The package included files, intelligence reports that were suppressed after Kandahar. They confirm what Michael said: the leak didn't stop with Conrad. There's someone else, someone still active, someone who's been covering their tracks for 7 years. Jack opened his eyes. The grief was still there, but something else was rising alongside it. Purpose, determination, the cold clarity of a new mission. Who? I don't know yet, but I have contacts who can find out. Patterson met his eyes. This isn't over, Jack. Not really. Conrad was just one piece of a larger puzzle. Then we'll find the other pieces. Jack's voice was steady. Michael asked me to find the truth. I intend to deliver. But that was a battle for another day. Tonight there was still work to be done. 1 week later, the corporate headquarters of Morgan Technologies gleamed in the autumn sunlight, its glass and steel facade reflecting a sky scrubbed clean by overnight rain. Jack Miller stood in the lobby wearing a suit that Victoria had insisted on buying for him, feeling more uncomfortable than he had ever felt in combat gear. The past 7 days had been a whirlwind of interrogations and depositions and press conferences. Conrad's arrest had dominated the news cycle, the image of the silver-haired CEO being led from the warehouse in handcuffs played on endless loop across every network. The evidence: Victoria had compiled financial records, communication logs, proof of technology transfers to foreign buyers, had been enough to guarantee conviction on charges ranging from embezzlement to treason. Viktor Morozov was cooperating with federal investigators, his testimony filling in gaps that documents couldn't cover. The mercenary had been a soldier once before poverty and circumstance had led him down darker paths. Perhaps Jack thought there was still something worth saving in the man. Detective Santos had received a commendation from the department, her 18-month investigation finally vindicated. She had called Jack that morning, her voice carrying a warmth that hadn't been there during their first tense meeting at Maggie's diner. You know, Miller, most civilians who get involved in law enforcement operations end up complicating things. You actually made my job easier. A pause. If you ever want to consult on cases, I know some people who could use someone with your skill set. I'll keep that in mind. Now standing in the Morgan Technologies lobby, Jack waited for the elevator that would carry him to the executive floor, to Victoria, to a conversation he wasn't sure he was ready for. The elevator doors opened. He stepped inside, pressed the button for the 23rd floor, and watched the numbers climb. Victoria was waiting for him in the conference room, surrounded by board members in expensive suits and accountants in slightly less expensive suits. The faces around the table ranged from curious to skeptical to openly hostile executives who had built their careers on Conrad's patronage, now scrambling to distance themselves from his crimes. Ladies and gentlemen, Victoria's voice carried the authority of a woman who had built an empire and refused to let anyone tear it down. I'd like to introduce Jack Miller, former Marine Corps Master Sergeant, current hero, and as of today, Morgan Technologies' new Director of Corporate Security. Murmurs rippled around the table. Jack felt the weight of their stares, the assessment and judgment of people who measured worth in stock portfolios and quarterly earnings. The position comes with a comprehensive benefits package. Victoria's eyes met his warm with something that went beyond professional courtesy, including full medical coverage for his son's condition, and a salary that accurately reflects the value of his contributions to this company. One of the board members, a heavy-set man with a florid face and an obvious toupee, leaned forward. Mrs. Chen, with respect, we're in the midst of a crisis. Our former CFO has been arrested for treason. Our stock price is in free fall. Is this really the time to be creating new executive positions? It's exactly the time. Victoria didn't flinch. Mr. Miller saved my daughter's life. He saved my life. He exposed the corruption that was eating this company from the inside. Her voice hardened. And if anyone at this table has a problem with rewarding that kind of loyalty and competence, they're welcome to submit their resignation. Silence. The board members exchanged glances, calculating risks and rewards, weighing their options. The heavy-set man sat back. Welcome aboard, Mr. Miller. Later, after the board meeting had concluded and the executives had dispersed to their various domains, Jack and Victoria sat alone in her office. The Chicago skyline stretched beyond the windows, the city sprawling toward the horizon in a tapestry of concrete and glass and stubborn human ambition. You didn't have to do this. Jack's voice was quiet. The job, the salary, any of it. Yes, I did. Victoria turned from the window, her expression serious. You gave us your breakfast when you had nothing, Jack. You protected us for 7 years without asking for anything in return. You nearly died stopping Conrad. She moved closer, her hand finding his. This isn't charity, it's acknowledgement. It's what you deserve. I don't know how to be a corporate security director. I know how to be a soldier. Then be a soldier. Be exactly who you are. Her voice softened. Michael trusted you with everything he had, his reputation, his legacy, his family. I think I understand why now. Jack looked at her, really looked at her the way he had been avoiding for 7 years. Victoria Chen was brilliant and beautiful and stronger than anyone he had ever met. She had built an empire from her father's modest beginnings, had raised a daughter alone while grieving a husband she would never stop loving, had faced down corporate treachery and armed mercenaries without losing her composure. And she was looking at him with something in her eyes that made his chest tight. This can't... He stopped, started again. Michael was my best friend. I can't... I know. Victoria's voice was gentle. I'm not asking for anything, Jack. Not now, maybe not ever. She squeezed his hand. But I want you to know that whatever this is, whatever it becomes, Michael would approve. He loved both of us. He would want us to be happy. How can you be sure? Because I knew him better than anyone. A sad smile crossed her face. And because the man who spent his last moments telling you to protect his family wouldn't want that family to include a lonely widow and a protector who never lets himself feel anything. Jack was silent for a long moment, processing her words, weighing them against 7 years of carefully constructed distance. Then, slow. Whatever this is, whatever it might become, it needs to be slow. For Alex, for Emma, for both of us. Victoria's smile widened, genuine warmth replacing the sadness. Slow sounds perfect. Maggie's diner was closed for a private party that evening, a celebration that felt strange after so much violence, but necessary for the same reason. Maggie herself presided over the kitchen, producing mountains of food that made Jack's mouth water in ways he had forgotten were possible. Alex and Emma sat together at the corner booth playing a card game that seemed to involve Captain Hoppy as a referee. The two children had bonded with remarkable speed, finding common ground in shared trauma and the resilience that only children possessed. She's nice. Alex had told Jack that morning, his voice carrying the gravity of an 8-year-old delivering important news. Emma, I mean, she let me hold Captain Hoppy. She said he only has one eye, but that makes him special. Like a pirate. Yeah, buddy, I think they're both pretty special. Now watching the children laugh and argue over card game rules, Jack felt something loosen in his chest. A knot he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. A weight that had pressed against his heart for 7 years, slowly crushing the bone out of every moment. Victoria appeared beside him, 2 cups of coffee in her hands. She offered one, their fingers brushing in the exchange. He would have loved this. Her voice was soft, meant only for him. Michael, seeing our kids together. Seeing us. She paused, searching for the right word. Seeing us healing. You think we're healing? I think we're starting to. Victoria's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her smile was genuine. For the first time since he died, I feel like maybe the future isn't just something to survive. Maybe it's something to actually live. Jack sipped his coffee, watching Emma demonstrate a card trick to Alex, watching his son's face light up with delight at the simple magic of it. He thought about Michael, about the video footage that had finally shown him what his best friend had really thought in those final moments. He thought about the message on the back of the photograph. Find him if you need help. Trust him with your life. Trust him with Emma's life. He's family. Family. The word escaped his lips before he could stop it. Victoria looked at him. What? Michael wrote that I was family, in the note on the photograph. Jack met her eyes. I spent 7 years watching from the shadows because I thought I didn't deserve to be part of your lives. Because I thought my failure had cost Michael his life, and I couldn't face that. And now I know the truth. Michael didn't die because I failed. He died making a choice, the same choice he would have made 1,000 times over. He died being exactly who he was. Jack's voice steadied, and he asked me to take care of his family, not as penance, not as punishment, as a gift. Victoria's hand found his again, their fingers intertwining naturally. Then take care of us, Jack, not from the shadows, not from a distance, as part of our lives. I don't know how to do that. Neither do I. Her smile was crooked, vulnerable, beautiful. But I think we can figure it out together. Emma appeared beside them. Captain Hoppy clutched in her arms, her face serious with the weight of something she needed to say. Mr. Jack. He knelt to her level, meeting her eyes. Yeah, sweetheart. Mommy told me you knew my daddy, that you were friends. Yeah, he was my best friend. Was he brave like you? Jack thought about Michael, his laughter, his courage, his unwavering determination to protect the people he loved. He thought about the video footage, those final moments, when a dying man had spent his last breath thinking about his family. Braver, Jack said, much braver. Emma considered this with the gravity of a child processing important information. Then she held out Captain Hoppy. Daddy sent me this, before he went to heaven. Do you want to hold him? Jack's throat tightened. The rabbit had traveled thousands of miles, survived 7 years of childhood adventures, been clutched through nightmares and hospital stays, and the ordinary terrors of growing up without a father. And now Emma was offering to share him this precious connection to the man she had never known. I would be honored. He took the rabbit gently, feeling the worn fabric, the place where an eye used to be, the history embedded in every frayed thread. Somewhere he knew Michael was watching. Somewhere his best friend was finally at peace. Later that night, after the party had ended and the children had been put to bed, Jack stood alone on the diner's back steps, staring up at the October sky. The stars were hidden by city light pollution, but he knew they were there, constant, unchanging, indifferent to the small dramas playing out beneath them. His phone buzzed, unknown number. He answered with a caution that had become second nature. Mr. Miller? A voice he didn't recognize, male, middle-aged, carrying the careful modulation of someone who worked in shadows. You don't know me, but I know about Kandahar, about the intelligence leak that killed your team. Jack's grip tightened on the phone. Who is this? Someone who has been looking for answers for a very long time. Someone who was there in a different capacity and has never stopped wondering who sold out American soldiers. Conrad is in custody. He's going to spend the rest of his life in prison. Conrad was a buyer, a middleman. The original source of the leak, the person who compromised Operation Silent Thunder before your team ever left American soil, is still out there. A pause. And they know you're looking now, Master Sergeant. They've been watching the Conrad situation very closely. Give me a name. Not yet. The evidence isn't complete. But I can tell you this, the person who sold out your team isn't finished. They've been active for 7 years, continuing to compromise American operations, continuing to profit from the blood of soldiers they've never met. Jack stared into the darkness, his mind racing. Another enemy, another mission, another debt to be paid in the currency of justice. Why are you telling me this? Because Michael Hayes was a good man, because 4 Marines died in a dusty compound in Kandahar, and no one has ever been held accountable. Because some of us believe that accountability matters even when the people responsible wear stars on their shoulders. The phone went silent for a moment. Then, be careful, Master Sergeant. The war isn't over, it's just beginning. The line went dead. Jack stood on the steps for a long moment, processing the call, weighing its implications. Behind him, through the diner's windows, he could see Victoria cleaning up from the party, her movements graceful and efficient. He could see the door to the room where Alex and Emma slept, watched over by Maggie's fierce maternal instincts. His family, unlikely and imperfect and earned through 7 years of sacrifice. Michael's voice echoed in his memory, those final words from the helmet camera footage. Don't let them win, Jack. Don't let them bury this. Find the truth. Jack slipped the phone back into his pocket and looked up at the hidden stars one more time. I'll find them, brother, he whispered. I'll find whoever did this, and I'll make sure they pay. The Guardians' debt had been paid, but the Guardians' war had only just begun.